Hi guys, this is Arya. This is my first vlog, so I'm pretty stressed out about videos for the moment. Maybe I'll get used to it someday. Ever since I watched Bohemian Rhapsody, the Freddie Mercury movie, other members are trying to present as the definitive story. Something's been bugging me. Just something about its presentation and its story, I think makes it more to be a message movie than an authentic movie about the life of the man, the musician. So I'm gonna jump into showing you some pictures, and I will narrate over it just to show you how this movie, through its direction, through its dialogue, through its cuts, and its overall presentation, just somehow presents Freddie Mercury as a figure that is more suitable for a political movie, for a socio-political movie than it is for a biopic about a musician and for some, a legend. So here goes. Okay, so speaking of what's been bugging me about this movie, I think it's not just a biopic, it's a story of an immigrant underdog of sorts who just wants to blend in, and he acts out somehow is damaging to his life, to his image, and ultimately to his band. That is according to the movie. And he goes so far away until the Freddie in the movie actually loses touch with his roots, right until the end where he makes up with his dad. So this is basically a well-made movie, despite what you might think, and I agree that the way the other band members are depicted is just downright silly. But the one thing that stands out to me is the tender moments between Freddie and his lover. Those moments stand out, and it's about a guy who wants to bring his taste of fine art music, the opera, to the masses. So it's a rhapsody, but a Bohemian Rhapsody, so to speak. I think the movie is ultimately detrimental to Freddie's legacy and somehow culturally and artistically appropriates his legend status. The movie opens with the image of a dying man. So you know that this is the Freddie that's been diagnosed with AIDS, and he knows he's spending his final years. Now, of course, we know that 2 years after the Live Aid performance in 1987, he knew that he had to live with AIDS. But the movie, I guess, uses it to dramatize. So he wakes up and he coughs a bit. We later learn that it is because of his sore throat that refuses to go away because he's been diagnosed with AIDS. And so this is basically the morning of his final fight. So he has to go on stage to perform at Live Aid, and this has to be the ultimate performance of his lifetime. And we know that they've been on tour for the past year, and of course it's special, it's a charity event, but ultimately it's just another show for Freddie. Now, I want you to pay close attention to how the movie frames Freddie. So this is a redemption story, if you will, in some ways, because we open with this man who is pretty much like Walter White in Breaking Bad, wants to redeem himself now that he's been given a death sentence. So Live Aid becomes this bit of his redemption arc. Now notice how the following shots portray him, and I think this intro section is very well made. The next shot shows Freddie trimming his mustache. Now, as funny as this may sound, I think the mustache, the iconic mustache, serves as a symbol of his reckless life, of his reckless persona, of all his sexual adventures or whatever. When he trims the mustache, it actually means that he is putting a cap on all those reckless moments. He decided to take it slowly, take it one step at a time. Notice how this mustache motif, or whatever, the metaphor for Freddie's adventurous or dark side, plays out in the movie. Also notice how the movie, when it shows that Freddie is going and driving off to the stage, it's his family that's practically waving him goodbye. And his family are, of course, his cats. Freddie was a cat person, as you know. So in one shot we learn that this is a lonely man. And then you can hear, of course, Somebody to Love playing in the background. One thing I wanted to mention is that how this soundtrack to this movie is pretty on the nose. If you pay attention to the lyrics, it is practically describing what is going on in each scene. For instance, here you hear Somebody to Love. It's about Freddie's quest to find someone to love, obviously. So this is the whole theme of the movie. Freddie is looking to find the right person. He goes from Mary to pursuing lovers around the world in Munich and New York, until finally settling with Jim. Imagine if you didn't know who Freddie was. So this section is pretty interesting in that it shows this rich guy getting dressed, getting ready for his work, and you suddenly see him in this tank top, this in jeans, and he's like preparing as if he's a boxer, I think. In some ways, he's preparing for this big fight. Now, this is a pretty interesting contrast because you see the artist versus the real man. Freddie himself mentioned in some interviews that people think that I might eat them or something, but deep down I'm really boring. He appeared too charismatic for people. But the reason I'm putting so much emphasis on cold open of the movie is that it pretty much like pictures Freddie in sort of having lost the battle with life, but now he faces his final rise to glory. Pretty much we're dealing with this anti-hero type character. The next important bit of the movie is the family reunion scene where Freddie introduces Queen members and Mary to his family. So his mom shows this album of their older pictures. So we learn that they are Parsi. These were Persian people who fled Arab persecution during the Arab invasion of Iran. So this is pretty interesting because the movie suddenly becomes a story of an immigrant who wants to blend in, who wants to be counted. This is the movie, not the real life, because in real life Freddie wasn't so desperate to blend in. If you check out his interviews or read about him, he was just a guy that didn't take himself or anything too seriously. It just puts it in perspective that this movie ultimately becomes a story of an outsider who wants to adopt the Western life. Now next is a pretty interesting shot because you see Freddie literally distancing himself from the family table. So he's on the side, he's practicing his Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, the song from A Night at the Opera, which is pretty much, I guess, Freddie's dream for an ideal London life, and going to work every morning, and then each day he narrates in that song what he's going to do. So he's there celebrating his birthday, and suddenly he reveals to his family that he has changed his last name to Mercury. I guess this part is just there to dramatize the whole changing of his identity. So there we have Freddie's first transformation from this normal outsider guy who just wanted to blend in, and he found this band, pretty much adopted this rock star lifestyle. He sets aim to become a legend now with his new identity. Now I like the directing in this bit because it pretty much visually separates Freddie from the whole group. It is pretty interesting because as I mentioned, as soon as Freddie distances himself from his roots or his real family, and he adopts the new name Mercury, he gets the first major call, I guess, of his career, according to the movie. Now you see him in this shot pictured next to a portrait of Queen Elizabeth. So, in a way, he has become this British guy now. He's no longer the Parsi guy or the guy made fun of at the airport. Now I wanted to give this shout out to a great video that I found on YouTube made by Thomas Flight. It's called Bohemian Rhapsody's Terrible Editing, a Breakdown. And Thomas goes to show how a particular scene where Queen members are discussing their contract with John Reed, their soon-to-be manager, played by Lord Baelish from Game of Thrones, just goes to show how the editing of this movie is all over the place. The POVs make no sense. 1 minute you're watching some shot from the point of view of Freddie, and next you're cut to Brian, and it just doesn't make sense. And you get equal close-ups for each member, where the main guy should have been Freddie. The main focus should have been on Freddie, but for some reason, I guess because Brian and Roger are our producers here, we get equal amount of screen time or screen presence for Brian and Roger too. And of course, John Deacon is just a sidekick, pretty much. Now, my theory is that this movie wasn't supposed to be about Freddie. Now, you might be familiar with the case of how Sacha Baron Cohen was supposed to play Freddie and how he was basically fired from the movie by Brian and Roger. Now, if you read his interview, he says that when they told me about the story, they told me that the first half is going to be about Freddie's struggle, and then it shows how the band carries on and keeps the legend alive, or something like that. Sacha Baron Cohen was indicating is that Brian and Roger, he didn't name actual names, but they wanted this movie to be as much about themselves, about the band Queen, than Freddie as an artist, as a figure. So now it shows in the final movie because it clearly gives too much time to other members. That it doesn't need to be that way, because the movie should have been focused on Freddie, and I guess we should have been experiencing everything from his point of view. So the band members appear too cartoonish, even though they are accentuated in shots like this. Now, it is true that Queen stood by Freddie, and I believe that they did good by doing the tribute concert and producing Made in Heaven, and finally releasing the No One But You single. And I think Queen should have stopped at 97. This movie so desperately wants to get the point across that without the other members, Freddie would have been lost, I guess, or would have ruined his career. But actually, the moment that should have been in the movie, they should have included the production of the last 3 albums of Queen. I mean, Kind of Magic, The Miracle, and Innuendo. Right from the time that he was diagnosed with AIDS and he knew he had little time to live. The other band members jumped in and helped him make the best songs that he could have. And as you know, Freddie wrote fewer songs in the end. In the last 3 albums, Brian and Roger, I think, did everything, and Deacon too, to make the most out of Freddie's final moments, and it shows really. Another thing that's pretty interesting about this sequence with John Reid is when Freddie describes Queen to the guy. He says that we're a group of 4 misfits or something like that who don't belong, so we actually want the crowd to know that they belong. Basically, he's describing this band as an underdog band, but this is far from the truth. I think Queen was the establishment. I mean, come on, from the band name, although it has a double meaning, to the band playing God Save the Queen at the end of their shows. This is pretty much the establishment band. They never went too political for their time. In fact, in their late 70s material like Jazz and News of the World, they poke fun at these political movements, like, I guess, the punk movement even. In fact, the whole departure from Day at the Races that shows in News of the World is them standing up to the punk movement. Suddenly they were done with these operatic albums that had progressive elements. Now they produce a solid rock album that has punk elements in it. Now, another interesting thing about this movie is that it came out, I guess, a couple of years from the Channel 5 documentary called The Freddie Mercury Story, Who Wants to Live Forever. Now, I watched the documentary, and I think it's a solid piece. It depicts Freddie's struggle with the disease in his final days and his struggle with the press pretty accurately, and I think it's pretty honest in that. Sure, the actors, the actors playing other Queen members aren't as convincing, but the lead guy who plays Freddie Mercury is, in my opinion, and this is gonna sound, in my opinion, he's a better Freddie than Rami Malek. Yeah, Rami Malek fits the bill. He should have been the perfect candidate for Freddie, and he won an Academy Award for it. No contest. But I think Rami is better at imitating Freddie than becoming Freddie. He has every little detail of Freddie's personality, his mannerisms. But the guy from the Channel 5 documentary actually makes you sympathize with Freddie's struggle with the disease. The contrast that I wanted to make here is that there is a scene where Freddie proposes to Mary, and Mary, of course, says yes. They make this pact. It's interesting that in the Channel 5 documentary, this exact scene plays out only between Freddie and Jim. And it is Jim who brings the ring. So it is interesting now, knowing that Brian and Roger are the guys behind the Bohemian Rhapsody movie. It's interesting that they made this particular scene to contrast with the documentary. And I think the whole movie kind of tries to undermine the documentary or make people pretty much dismiss it. And notice how right after the scene where Freddie confesses that he's bisexual, right from that scene we cut to the big reveal, which is Freddie's mustache. So the transformation, I guess, takes shape specifically in his mustache. Like, the mustache, as funny as it sounds, represents this wild side of Freddie, this dark side of Freddie, this adventurous, promiscuous side. And so the movie even jokes about it. Freddie asks Roger, okay, so what do you think about it? And Roger answers, okay, so you look gayer? And he dismisses it and says, no, I'm talking about the house. And this is pretty interesting because the movie, they blame the mustache, or whatever the mustache represents, the gay lifestyle, as the thing that ultimately brings Freddie down and almost causes them to break up. If you look at their interviews, the band never actually broke up, and they openly dismissed the press rumors that they were going to break up. Another part of the movie that works really well to show Freddie's loneliness is the big house. The house, like, it's this grand house that Freddie has specifically decorated for his lovers, I guess. And particularly, he pretty much got this house for Mary, so he could remain in contact with Mary. And he even calls her at night, but there is distance between them. So the family that he has left are basically his cats, and then Roger, his, I guess, closest friend from the band, according to the movie. So he has to throw a party to fill his loneliness. Again, speaking of how Freddie is pictured in this movie, this is not the legend that you expected. This is not the guy who didn't give a shit how the critics thought about their music or their, I don't know, lifestyles. In fact, the Freddie in this movie is pretty weak. He's a lone man who is desperate for connection, and it shows in his relationships with the band, and it shows in how he almost breaks up the band in the movie. So the movie completely forces the idea that Freddie is unable to cope with his kind of loss of Mary, because they couldn't be close with Mary. So now he acts out this insane gay persona. He throws this wild party, which is well documented in the Living on My Own video. And again, speaking of the soundtrack, you can hear Crazy Little Thing Called Love playing in the background. So basically, the movie is reminding us that this is a quest for love. So ultimately, this is what brings him down. So again, this party is pretty revealing of the Freddie that the movie wants to show us. This is where the other members kind of keep their distance. If you listen to the lyrics of Living on My Own, it talks about how he gets lonely, but this is his life. And in fact, in his famous interview with David Wick, he mentions that I just want to say that's my life, and it can be very lonely, but this is the life I chose, and I'm not complaining. But the movie shows Freddie pretty much being an asshole about it, as he would describe it. Next, we see Roger confronting Freddie about his lifestyle, and Brian kind of being angry about it. I guess they are pissed off with Paul Prenter, the bad influence over Freddie, because this is obviously the bad influence that got Freddie into drugs and gay clubs and led to his destruction and ultimately to contracting AIDS. There is truth to that, I guess, because Paul Prenter was a bad influence and ultimately sold Freddie's secrets to the press. But to blame it all on Prenter is just an easy route. The thing that bothers me about this scene is that it is pretty one-sided, that it shows Roger and Brian as pretty responsible people who are baffled by Freddie's irresponsibility, and you can actually notice that in how they are dressed in the party too. So Roger's in white and Paul Prender's in black. Like, you couldn't get any more black and white than that. And what bothers me about this scene is that famously Brian May had this divorce from his first wife, and so it got complicated at the time, and the press gave him a hard time for it. So the song "The Scandal," which appears on 1989's "The Miracle," is actually about the scandal surrounding Brian May's lifestyle. But the movie doesn't get to that, of course, because it ends before 1985. That is why, when I think about it, I feel like it's as if the movie is planning his revenge on Freddie. It's like Brian and Roger had to get this off their chests and somehow show the fans that they were displeased with Freddie's lifestyle at the moment. So it's like the movie is brainwashing you into blaming Freddie for everything that could have been damaging to Queen, to blaming him for the failure that Hot Space was, which, if you ask me, is a decent album. The movie just puts the Mustache, the disco-oriented album, and the promiscuous lifestyle all into the same box. This portion, which apparently is happening in 1982, I guess, or 3 or 4, it shows Brian coming up with the idea of "We Will Rock You," and there you have it. This is a completely unnecessary scene because we don't need to see how great Brian and Roger were at writing songs. This is a story about Freddie. So this scene served no purpose other than to portray Brian as much of a source of success and fame for Queen as Freddie. Again, when the movie delves into the gay lifestyle of Freddie, we have another One Bites the Dust playing. Like, the soundtrack pretty much goes step by step, like the lyrics of the song, each song fits the scene that is playing out. Another One Bites the Dust, of course, refers to how the gay men that Freddie has come in contact with each fall to AIDS at the end of the day. So here I come to the title of the video. Now, why I think Bohemian Rhapsody betrays Freddie Mercury? Because he blames everything that has gone wrong in Queen on Freddie. Freddie's lifestyle leads to him distancing from Mary, leads to him growing the mustache, which encapsulates all that is wrong according to the movie with his reckless lifestyle, and leads to him liking disco music according to the movie, I guess, because ultimately Freddie is to blame for everything, I guess. And Hot Space stems from his lifestyle, and later on we get to the part where Freddie's Mr. Bad Guy album, according to the movie album. I have huge respect for Brian, Roger, John, and Freddie, all of them, but I just think this is unfair. This scene in particular is pretty much unfair, because it seems to me like Brian and Roger had held this grudge all these years about Freddie's solo album, that they've somehow blamed everything going wrong with Queen. All happens to be about Freddie just wanting to release a solo album. And as you know, Roger had already released 2 albums before that. Fun in Space came out in '81, and Strange Frontier came out in '84, and both are great albums. I love those albums. So we get to the scene where Freddie reveals to the band that he has made this deal, and it's funny because it becomes about money. Now, in real life, if you check out Freddie's interviews, he always joked about the money. He always told, I don't know, the reporters that the reason the band is together is because of money and because we challenge ourselves. And he was being brutally honest about it. The movie misuses this trait, his honesty, and puts it into opportunism, I guess, and paints him as this guy who is too arrogant. So the ultimate step of him acting out is releasing his solo album and almost breaking up the band, which is far from the truth, because his solo album came out in '85, and Queen were on a hiatus in '83 because of the failure of Hot Space, and because they were just pretty much sick of being together for a while. They just needed a break from each other. So pretty much this scene is a complete lie in my book. I don't know if there have been discussions about it like this one, but the way it portrays Freddie is just not fair. Of course, if you think about the title of Freddie's solo album, Mr. Bad Guy, this is pretty much what the movie wants you to remember the album for. Look at this shot. This is a pretty interesting shot. Again, the composition shows you which character to sides with and which characters to be, I guess, feeling pity for. And the movie feels piteous Freddie. So Freddie's on the right side again contrasted with the family reunion scene. Freddie is distancing himself from his family, in this case the family being Queen. Brian May serves as the mediator. He's the wise guy, so he says, Freddie, we're a family, you can't do this, like as if releasing a solo album would be a betrayal to the family. Meanwhile, we know that in real life, Roger had already done it, and Brian May at the same time was collaborating with Eddie Van Halen on the Starfleet project. So if talking about family, and none of them were loyal to it, and in fact it wasn't about family. And so you see in this scene, like Roger stands at the far side of the shot and Freddie is closer to us. They are at the opposite ends. Roger is the side that wants to confront Freddie. He's the loyal friend, I guess, according to the movie, who's infuriated when there's a rift in the family. And the rift is caused by Mr. Bad Guy, an album that, interestingly, according to the movie, has been pretty much brought on as this intoxicating deal by Paul Printer. But I'm sure it must have been more than that. There must have been more to the album. He wanted to just put out some songs that, in his opinion, rightfully so, didn't fit with the Queen catalog, as they had experimented with Hot Space, and he knew that songs like Staying Power and Body Language, he couldn't force the other members to like these songs, and they pretty much stood out on that album. So he decided to produce his own album. And so you have these Roger and Brian at opposite ends. Freddie is the unstable friend, the anti-hero of the movie, in fact, because he doesn't belong anywhere. He right out says to them that all of you have families and I have none. And Roger is shown as this equally spontaneous but stable, loyal friend who deeply cares for Freddie as a friend and just doesn't want to lose him. So they get into fights every time. Like, these two get into fights and they pretty much make up at the end. And Brian May is the mediator. He's the voice of reason. And John Deacon, just shown as this fool, I guess. He's just does nothing, comes up with a line, and even Freddie dismisses him. This is a movie that's equally, I think, in my opinion, offensive to Freddie and equally offensive to John, because he has no say in it. He distanced himself from Queen in '97, and we have not heard much from him ever since. We know that he's living his life, but this is pretty unfair to John as well, because he has no character, he has no depth. And you can check out Freddie's famous musical prostitute interview with Roddy Dolezal. In that interview, he goes on about his solo album and why everyone thought exactly what this scene takes the wrong way. He says, I think the time has come where I want a whole album of my own, and Roger's done two already. So this is the fact that the movie skips for some reason. So I think most people thought that I'd be the first one to have a solo album, and then the band Queen would break up and all that. But here you are, after 30 years, 4 ladies are still rocking away, and he jokes about it. So I think the reason we stayed together for so long, this is another bit from the interview, is just that none of us want to leave, because if you leave, it's like being a coward. So this is complete opposite of what we see in the movie. In the movie, he is a coward because, according to the movie, he wanted to have his own record deal and he wanted to leave his family or something. So again, we see how the movie pities Freddie at the end, feels sorry for Freddie. I guess it should have been triumphant at some point. It's a movie that pities its hero. And you can see in the scene where Mary reassures him that he is loved, he has a family. So in the dramatic logic of the movie, Live Aid becomes an opportunity to do right by his family. That is Queen, of course. So he has to make it up to them, because according to the movie, he has betrayed them once with putting out his first solo album. And this is pretty interesting, because the movie suddenly goes from Mr. Bad Guy to Live Aid. they were on tour in South America and South Africa, just everywhere, I guess, save from the United States, if I'm not mistaken. So Live Aid must have been just another show for him, just in terms of scale. Now, interestingly, the movie skips over the South Africa controversy because, as you can read in the book portions that I put here, and you can check out the online videos on this incident. Queen played in South Africa. Meanwhile, there was a kind of a musical boycott. The band decided that they wouldn't perform there because they wouldn't perform under the dictatorship of South Africa. But Queen just went there and performed because, according to themselves, they were in the political band in the first place. And it's pretty interesting that the movie just skips over this fact. And somehow maybe this would have contradicted their true intentions for Live Aid. If you want to make a dramatic movie about Queen and you include Mr. Bad Guy and you include Hot Space, why not include the South African controversy? Now finally we get to the scene that really infuriates me. This is the scene where Freddie apologizes to the band, basically. And it's as if, again, this is like Brian and Roger, I can only imagine, have held this grudge against Freddie for being reckless with his album, with his solo album, with his lifestyle, and they somehow, through a movie, through fiction, wanted to have this apology by the imaginary version of Freddie, played by Rami Malek. They wanted to have this apology, as if patting themselves on the shoulder. In my opinion, even according to the facts, according to the events presented by the movie, he just wanted to have a solo album and wanted to break from the band. This is not such a big deal that they make it a redemption story, that now he has to redeem himself. Now he has found out that he has AIDS and he has little to live, so he plays at the Live Aid and realizes that he is incomplete without the band. This is pretty manipulative again. I don't want to use harsh words, but this is pretty grim if you think about it, what they are doing. Now, if this movie were made by independent people, it would have been okay, because then it would have been their take on the Freddie Mercury story. But since Roger and Brian, they had creative control over it, this is damaging to Freddie, that we know, that Queen fans know. It's like they're saying that at the end of the day, it was Queen that saved Freddie from his downfall. It was Live Aid, this miracle that somehow came down and saved them from going to oblivion. And basically Freddie says, I need you and you need me. But Freddie was doing fine on his own, I guess. Sure, Mr. Bad Guy didn't sell too well. In fact, it bombed. But later on, he collaborated with Montserrat Caballé, and they went on to make Barcelona, the album that has been receiving more praise with each year. And Freddie was doing good on his covers. He covered The Great Pretender. He went on a musical with Dave Clark. And I'm sure that with the proper publicity, Freddie would do just as good on his own. And I'm sure that Queen were the ones that needed Freddie. And it shows in the final albums, because they make the best use of Freddie's voice in his final years. And in fact, the movie should have been, I think, in my opinion, about the final years of Freddie's struggle, because then it becomes a kind of triumph story. This is a dying man who steps up and does his best. Like, he pours his heart and soul into the last couple of albums by Queen. So that is the good deed, I think. Again, if you listen to his David Wigg interviews, this is not an album, the Mr. Bad Guy album. It shows that Freddie is kind of dissatisfied with it. It says it sounds awful or something. But if you listen to his 85 interview with David Wigg, he's very passionate about his solo album. He cares about each song. And each song told a story about him. He experimented with different styles, from reggae to disco. So this was not about money. It was about songs that he cared for. And again, you have the soundtrack which says what you should be feeling out loud. So we have Who Wants to Live Forever playing when we see Freddie coping with his death sentence. He's like pictured beside candles, and he's pretty much looks dead, lying in bed. He has this lonely breakfast with his cat, and then he like anonymously walks into the clinic, and somebody recognizes him. This is a good scene. These are all good scenes. This is a well-made movie. This is the point I want to get across, that it's a well-made movie for the most part, particularly in showing Freddie's loneliness. But it's a damaging movie. It's a well-made lie. It's a well-crafted piece of propaganda. This is propaganda for Queen, like painting him as their saviors of Freddie. This is propaganda for Hollywood, that Hollywood wants to paint themselves as the good guys. Okay, we care for immigrants, we care for minorities, of people with different sexual orientations, which in my opinion is kind of hypocritical. Now that the Me Too movement is on the rise, they just want to show, okay, now we're very tolerant of minorities. The movie uses Who Wants to Live Forever, but in fact we know that it's about Highlander. It's not about Freddie. It's just a movie like plucking at your heartstrings with that song. It's about Highlander, and the movie is about a guy who lives forever, lives just long enough to see his loved ones die, which is kind of, I guess, similar to Freddie's story, but this ultimately paints Freddie in a tragic light. Like, he's the anti-hero of the movie. He's the Walter White of the movie, if you will. He's the guy now who has done wrong to the band, according to the movie, and now he has to redeem himself. And then, Freddie comes clean about his disease, which is, again, another interesting little deviation from facts, because he apparently told them somewhere between 1987 and 1989, before the recording of Miracle. He sings while he kind of stops because of the sore throat. He says, "What the hell we're fighting for? Just surrender it and it won't hurt at all." This is again a famous lyric from Hammer to Fall, and it perfectly encapsulates where the movie's at the moment. Like, does Freddie keep on fighting, or does he surrender? And the movie, of course, dramatizes it by putting Live Aid as this ultimate test of Freddie's strength. And then again, the band members pat themselves on the back and say, and through Freddie, they use Freddie to make them feel better about themselves, I guess. He says, okay, now, Roger says, okay, you're a legend, Freddie. And Freddie says, no, we are all legends, but you're right, I'm legend. And then we have this long reincarnation of the Live Aid scene, like bit by bit. They play it like exactly like the real thing, like from Freddie's moves to the crowd to everything, just the band, the song. But for all the attention that they put into detail, it's interesting to me that the camera like zooms on Freddie's blue eyes, which is interesting because, as you all know, Freddie had dark eyes, like brown, black eyes. So how is it that you I guess I don't want to get into, like, I don't want to go into stereotyping, but this is a blatant example of whitewashing, if you ask me, in movies. If it had been like Scarlett Johansson playing the role of an Asian character, people are jumping up and down saying, okay, that's whitewashing them. I guess it's fair. Why do you put blue eyes on Freddie? I mean, really. Again, interestingly, when you contrast the final bit where he sings like Bohemian Rhapsody, and he sings "We Are the Champions," and he knows he's a dying man, and according to the movie, and he triumphs at the end, I guess, and fulfills everything. He makes up with his family, with his real family, with his parents, and with the Queen, and with his lovers. He's at ease. This is a pretty triumphant, but I think at the end of the day, the Live Aid section shows that this is a man who wanted to blend in, who wanted to be taken seriously as a rock star, as a British rock star, as a Western rock star. So he had to let go of his roots, and he had to adopt this adventurous lifestyle that, according to Mary in some scene, she tells him, like, we're gonna be having a pretty tough life. So this is, at the end of the day, the message of the movie. Like, I guess, keep track of your loved ones. It's a hard struggle, but you will make it. And this is an immigrant who becomes a, I guess, international legend. The movie is kind of stereotyping him as this immigrant and a gay man. And interesting thing, when you compare this final section with Rami Malek's speech at the Oscars as he receives the award, he says, "We made a film about a gay man, an immigrant who lived his life just unapologetically himself. The fact that I'm celebrating him and his story with you tonight is proof that we're longing for stories like this." And then he goes on to say, "I'm the son of immigrants from Egypt. I'm a first-generation American, and part of my story is being written right now." So this is the moment where life, I guess, imitates art, or is it the other way around? I don't know. So in a way, the system, Hollywood, or whatever you want to call it, just puts this movie becomes a message movie. This movie becomes a movie about, I guess, tolerance for immigrants in America. And Rami Malek himself pretty much represents all that. He's an immigrant who has made it big in America, and now he's a superstar, thanks to Freddie, thanks to the movie, and thanks to Hollywood, I guess. So the message that I get from this whole thing, this movie, Bohemian Rhapsody, and its success at award shows like Oscars, is that, okay, Hollywood is the place where your dreams come true, even if you're an immigrant, even if you're a minority, even if you're Freddie Mercury. Take Freddie Mercury, like he was this immigrant, and he made it big, although he sacrificed relationships and he ultimately fell to the disease, but that is the price you pay. This is the thing that I get from the movie, and I think it's an offensive message. I don't know. If you ask me, this is not about Freddie, this is about the system. And then he's dating, of course, Lucy Boynton in real life, so the parallels are quite uncanny here, because now next time you think about Freddie, you will think about Rami Malek, because you associated naturally with Lucy Boynton, and you see her as Mary, so he becomes a representation of Freddie Mercury in life and in cinema, which is pretty interesting. And even the movie doesn't show Freddie as this unapologetic persona. It shows him as weak and arrogant and kind of a jerk. He actually pretty much comes across as this spoiled brat, like a Game of Thrones character. This spoiled brat who just wanted desperately to blend in with his new society, with his new surroundings, and he just ended up acting out too hard until it came to bite him. That's what I get from the movie. I think Freddie's real story should have been about his strength. The strength of a man to carry on despite all this, coming to do good by his band. Should have been the story, I guess. This is what actually happened in real life. If you listen to their final albums, Freddie is pretty at top of his game, and in Miracle and Innuendo. This is pretty fascinating. The movie, it has good segments, I guess, particularly when it comes to Freddie and his lovers. But at the end of the day, it's just stereotypes him. And I think, although I may be cynical, I think this movie is a vehicle for Brian May, and Roger Taylor to shine unnecessarily alongside Mercury. Because it is unnecessary, because fans of Queen already love these two. They don't need to prove to us that they were just as good as Freddie. We know that they were just as good as Freddie. They were all good in different ways. I mean, John Deacon wrote some of their best songs. Same with Brian. He wrote some of the best songs. He wrote most of their better rock tracks are written by Brian May, and most of the great songs that Freddie came to sing, like in the last two albums, were written by Roger and Brian. If you dig deep, although they are credited to the band as a whole, they were pretty much written by Brian and Roger and John, and Freddie just came into the studio and sang them. So I guess the movie is not about Freddie Mercury. It's about the idea of Freddie Mercury as a means to a socio-political goal. It becomes a message about racial and sexual identity, and it uses, I think the movie uses your nostalgia of Freddie to get it across. It's a well-made movie, so when I first saw it, I was captivated by it. But the more I thought about it, I saw how it kind of manipulated me. It kind of like brainwashed me into believing some things that were not necessarily the truth. Ultimately, I think if Freddie Mercury himself watched this movie, I think that the man would have rolled his eyes at the movie. Thank you for watching this video and listening to this long rant. Again, watch Bohemian Rhapsody for yourself and compare it with other documentaries on Queen and one of the documentaries I think you will enjoy because it's mostly based on interviews and it's pretty much covers them, factually. It's Champions of the World. I don't know if it's available on DVD or Blu-ray, but that's a great documentary. It's 2 hours long, I think. Um, Again, thank you. I'm Arya from Tehran, Iran. Sorry for my accent or intonation or whatever. Cheers.